They knelt in the red dust, their hands tied behind their backs, faces pale under the harsh African sun. The stolen gold glittered in the dirt before them, each bar a silent witness to greed. If you want to hear the truth that no one dared to tell, stay with me, and make sure you follow every second of this story. Because once you know what happened here, you will never look at power the same way again. Ibrahim Traoré stood a few steps away, his boots sinking slightly into the soil. His eyes were locked on the men. 3 of them, all foreigners, their clothes torn, their boots caked in mud from a mine. Behind him, armed soldiers waited, the heat shimmering over their shoulders like smoke from an unseen fire. The air was still, but the tension was heavy enough to crush a man's chest. The tallest prisoner spoke first. His voice shook, but his words were steady. "We were only here for business. This is a mistake." His accent was unmistakably American. Traoré did not move. He let the silence stretch, his gaze fixed on the gold. That silence was heavier than any shout. It said, "I have heard these lies before." Minutes earlier, the convoy had roared into the mining site, dust swirling like a storm. Traoré's soldiers had surrounded the pit before anyone could run. The workers, locals forced to dig under armed watch, had thrown down their tools, their faces lighting up at the sight of the flag on the commander's jeep. But the gold had already been packed into crates, marked with strange shipping codes that did not belong to any local company. The youngest of the prisoners, his face red from the heat, tried to speak. "We have permits," but one of the soldiers shoved him to his knees before the words could finish. A murmur rippled through the crowd of villagers who had gathered. They knew permits did not mean justice. Permits could be bought. Lives could be bought. Traoré finally stepped forward, the dust crunching beneath his boots. He picked up 1 gold bar, holding it high so the sun caught its edge. "This," he said slowly, "was taken from the earth of our people, and you thought you could hide it across the ocean." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. One of the prisoners glanced at another, a flicker of recognition passing between them. Quick, but not quick enough to escape the commander's eyes. There was a story here, one that went deeper than gold. Traoré had seen that look before, in meetings, in betrayals, in wars. Somewhere beyond the trees, a distant engine roared. Traoré knew the day was far from over. What was coming next could turn this small victory into something far more dangerous. And as he looked at the prisoners again, he realized the real fight had only just begun. The sound of the engine grew louder, breaking the tense silence. Traoré lifted his head toward the tree line, his soldiers instantly shifting into position. Dust began to rise in the distance, curling upward like a warning. The prisoners exchanged uneasy glances, their shoulders stiffening. They knew who was coming. From behind the crowd, an older villager whispered, "They will not come for the gold, they will come for them." His voice trembled, as though speaking those words made the danger real. Traoré caught it, but his face did not change. He simply raised one hand, signaling his men to hold their ground. The rumble of the approaching vehicle drew nearer until a black SUV burst through the trees. It stopped a few feet away, its tinted windows reflecting the sun. The driver's door opened slowly, and a man in a crisp white shirt stepped out. His hair was neatly combed, his sunglasses glinting as he scanned the scene. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed no one could touch him. "You have something that belongs to us," he said calmly, his voice carrying an American accent just like the prisoner's. But his tone was different, colder, heavier. Traoré did not answer. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the villagers. Their eyes were on him, waiting to see if the man they had placed their trust in would bend under foreign pressure. The gold still lay in the dirt between them, untouched, like bait in a trap. The man in white took a step closer, ignoring the rifles pointed at him. "You release them now, and this ends quietly. No one needs to hear about this." One of the prisoners looked up, hope flashing in his eyes. But Traoré's jaw tightened. "Quiet is the reason they think they can come here," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Quiet is how they have been stealing from us for years." For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. Then the man in white gave a small, almost amused smile. "Do you really believe you can stop this?" His words were not a question, they were a challenge. Traoré's answer came in the form of a signal. 2 soldiers stepped forward, lifting the crates of gold and turning them so the strange codes faced the crowd. The villagers murmured, their voices rising. These were not local codes. They belonged to a foreign shipping company, one that had been accused of smuggling resources out of Africa before. The man in white smile faded. He knew what this meant. If those codes were exposed, the theft would no longer be a hidden transaction. It would be a scandal that reached powerful officers across the ocean. But before Traoré could speak again, the sound of another engine echoed in the distance. This one was deeper, heavier, like a military truck. The man in white's head turned sharply toward the noise. Traoré's soldiers adjusted their rifles, their eyes narrowing. Whatever was coming through those trees, it was not here for peace. The heavy growl of the engine grew closer, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Leaves trembled on the trees as a dark green military truck emerged from the forest path. Its front was dented, its paint scratched, as though it had traveled through battles of its own. The villagers stepped back, a wave of unease sweeping through them. Traoré's eyes narrowed. This was not his truck, and it did not belong to any local unit he knew. The vehicle rolled to a slow stop, its brakes hissing. The back door swung open, and 6 men stepped down, each wearing mismatched uniforms with no clear insignia. Their weapons were polished, their boots clean, men who had not been in the mines but came prepared for something else entirely. The man in white straightened his posture. "You took your time," he said to the newcomers. One of them nodded without a word, his gaze locked on Traoré. It was a look without fear, the kind of look that came from men who were certain of the power standing behind them. The leader of the new arrivals walked forward, tall and broad-shouldered, a thin scar running from his ear to his jaw. His voice was deep and steady. "Commander, we are here for those men." He pointed at the prisoners without even glancing at the gold lying in the date. "Hand them over, and this ends." Traoré's soldiers shifted, their grips tightening on their rifles. The crowd's murmurs grew into worried whispers. Some of the villagers moved their children to the back, sensing the danger that was about to unfold. Traoré stepped forward, his boots grinding into the dust. "They are thieves," he said plainly. "They stole from our land." The scarred man tilted his head. "They are not your problem anymore. This is bigger than you." A sharp wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it the scent of gasoline and iron. It seemed to deepen the silence that followed. Then Traoré took a slow breath and said, "If it is bigger than me, then it is exactly my problem." A flash of tension passed between the 2 men. Neither moved, but the air between them was heavy with the threat of violence. Then, without warning, one of the prisoners spoke. "If you let us go, you will not just save your people, you will save your own life." His voice cracked, but the urgency in it was real. The crowd gasped, eyes darting between Traoré and the prisoners. The man in white's jaw tightened, as though those words had crossed a line. The scarred man gave a small nod to his men, and suddenly rifles were raised on both sides. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then a single bird took off in the trees, its wings cutting through the silence. It was the only sound before the first soldier moved a step forward, and the standoff became one breath away from bloodshed. The soldiers' fingers hovered over their triggers, every muscle tense. Even the air seemed to stop moving, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Traoré's eyes swept across the men in front of him, calm, calculating, and ready, but he noticed something else. The scarred man's gaze kept drifting toward the tree line, as though he expected someone else to arrive. A faint metallic clink broke the silence. It came from behind the prisoners. One of Traoré's soldiers stepped forward, yanking a black device from the belt of the tallest captive. It was no ordinary radio. Its edges were scorched, the screen cracked, but the blinking red light on its side told a story of its own. It was still transmitting. The scarred man's jaw tightened. "Put that back," he ordered, his voice low but sharp. Traoré stepped closer, taking the device from his soldier's hand. "Who are you speaking to?" he asked, his tone almost casual. But beneath that calm was an edge sharper than any blade. The prisoner swallowed hard. His eyes flicked to the man in white, then to the scarred man, before settling back on the date. He did not answer. Traoré pressed a button on the side of the device. A burst of static filled the air, followed by a voice, clear, distant, and speaking in English. "Status report. Extraction team is ready. Do you have the package?" The villagers' faces twisted in confusion, but the meaning was clear enough to try. This was not just about stolen gold. the men kneeling before him with a package. The man in white took a slow step forward. "Commander, this is your last chance. You have no idea how far this goes." Traoré's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You are wrong. I know exactly how far it goes. That is why you are here." The scarred man raised his hand, and his soldiers took one synchronized step forward. The sound of boots against dirt was like a drumbeat before war. Traoré's men mirrored the movement, rifles steady, eyes unblinking. Then, in the midst of the standoff, a voice rose from the crowd. It was the old villager who had spoken before. "Do not give them away, Commander. If you do, they will come again and take more than gold." The words cut through the tension like a blade. Even some of the foreign soldiers glanced toward the old man, as if the weight of truth in his voice was hard to ignore. Traoré's grip tightened on the radio device. He looked at the gold, at the prisoners, and at the armed men who had come to claim them. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was no longer about a single decision. It was about the message it would send to anyone who thought they could take without consequence. The scarred man's hand twitched, a signal, a threat, or mistake. Whatever it was enough to make every finger on every trigger tighten by a fraction. One wrong word now, and the clearing would explode into chaos. The heat pressed down like a weight, making every breath feel heavy. Sweat traced slow paths down the faces of soldiers on both sides, yet no one dared to move first. Traoré's gaze shifted from the scarred man to the man in white, searching for the smallest sign of weakness. He saw it, not in their hands, but in their eyes. The longer this standoff lasted, the more their certainty began to crack. Without warning, the blinking light on the captured radio went dark. Traoré turned it over in his hand. The device was dead. Someone had cut the signal. His eyes darted to the prisoners. The youngest was smiling, not in victory, but as if he knew something terrible had just been set in motion. "What did you do?" Traoré asked, his voice low, his words deliberate. The prisoner met his gaze. "You think this is a battle you can win in the date. But this is bigger than dirt." Before Traoré could press further, the sound of helicopters filled the air. Shadows passed over the clearing as two black aircraft circled above. The wind from their rotors whipped dust into the faces of the villagers, forcing them to shield their eyes. The man in white took a step back, shouting over the noise. "This is your final warning, Commander. Stand down." Traoré's soldiers tightened their formation, forming a wall between the crowd and the armed foreigners. But the scarred man's troops began to fan out, their movement precise, coordinated. They were not here to negotiate anymore. One of the helicopters descended lower, its side door sliding open to reveal more armed men inside. A rope dropped from its frame, swaying in the rotor wash. Two soldiers began to descend, their weapons strapped tightly to their bodies. Traoré's mind raced. If they managed to take the prisoners now, the gold would follow, and with it, the power they had stolen from his people for years. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the roar. "If you cross this line, you are declaring war, not with me, but with every man, woman, and child who calls this land their home." The scarred man's lips curled into a thin smile. "Then so be it." The first foreign soldier's boots hit the ground. That was all it took. A single gunshot cracked through the air, not from Traoré's side, not from the foreigners, but from somewhere deep within the tree line. The sound was followed by a scream as one of the descending soldiers clutched his leg, falling into the date. Chaos erupted. Shouts, gunfire, and the deafening thump of helicopter blades filled the clearing. Villagers ran for cover as soldiers dug behind crates and vehicles. Traoré grabbed the nearest prisoner by the collar, pulling him towards safety, but he felt the barrel of a gun press against the back of his neck. A voice hissed into his ear, "You should have walked away." The cold steel at his neck did not make Traoré flinch. His breathing stayed steady, his eyes fixed ahead as the battle raged around them. Bullets snapped through the air, kicking up dust, while the roar of the helicopters pounded against the earth. The man holding the gun leaned closer, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." Traoré slowly turned his head just enough to see the man's face, a stranger, not one of the scarred man's troops, but someone else entirely. His uniform bore no flag, no symbol, nothing to reveal where he came from. His eyes were cold, his expression carved from stone. Before the man could pull the trigger, a loud crash split the air. One of the helicopters shuddered and tilted sideways, black smoke pouring from its side. It spiraled down, smashing into the edge of the forest in a blast of heat and flame. The shockwave knocked several soldiers to the ground, giving Traoré the split-second opening he needed. He spun, driving his elbow hard into the man's ribs, then twisted the weapon from his hands. In the same motion, he shoved the man to the dirt and turned the gun toward the prisoners. "Move!" he barked. Two of his soldiers rushed forward, pulling the prisoners toward a waiting jeep. The villagers had scattered into the safety of the hills, but some stayed at the edge, their eyes locked on the unfolding fight, unwilling to leave until they saw the outcome. The scarred man shouted orders, trying to regain control, but the sudden explosion had shattered their formation. The man in white ducked behind the black SUV, speaking urgently into a hidden earpiece. Traoré caught fragments of his words. Abort extraction. Compromise. Repeat. Compromised. Then came a sound that silenced everything, a deep, low horn echoing from the distant hills. It was not mechanical. It was human. One by one, figures began to emerge from the forest, dozens of them armed, wearing a mix of civilian clothes and mismatched military gear. They moved with purpose, surrounding the clearing. Traoré's soldiers did not react with surprise. This was no coincidence. This was planned. The newcomers closed in, their leader, a tall woman with a rifle slung across her back. Stepping into the open, she looked at Traoré, then at the gold, and finally at the prisoners. "You caught them," she said simply. Her voice carried the calm of someone who had waited a long time for this moment. "Now we will take them where they truly belong." The man in white's face drained of color. "If you hand them over to her, you will never see daylight again," he warned. Traoré met his gaze. "I am not here to protect daylight. I am here to protect what is ours." With that, he gave a single nod to the woman. Her people moved in, taking the prisoners away. The gold remained in the date, untouched, as the helicopters retreated into the horizon. But Traoré knew this was not the end. This was only the first battle in a war no one had yet dared to name.